Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? There is a real danger in being a critical thinker and being willing to challenge your own beliefs. And that is every once in a while you find that your beliefs are shattered and the things that you thought were true for years or even decades aren't as true as you thought they were. And this can be very, very unsettling. For years, for decades, I have believed that free enterprise works, that laissez-faire capitalism was second to none, that the markets would be able to correct themselves, and that government interference is always bad. At least it's harmful more often than it's not harmful. And I believe that individual or private enterprises are able to do things better and cheaper and faster than the government. And yes, I've worked for the state of Connecticut for a while, so I see how ponderous those can become. These are viewpoints I defended, vigorously for a very long time, and they were core to my belief and understanding of the world. But lately, I've been doing this deep dive, maybe over the past 9 months or so, and the more evidence I saw and unearthed and uncovered, the harder it was to hold on to my beliefs the way they were. And so I'm in a state of change. The things I have found are really disturbing. I'm not a conspiracy theorist by any means. I talk about that a lot on the channel. But the things I've uncovered, they get as close to conspiracy as you can without actually being a conspiracy. And the number of quotes, egregious quotes, that I unearthed would fill up this video to the point where you wouldn't watch it. Maybe I'd make a follow-up video about that and talk about some of the quotes in more detail. But it's pretty awful. The focus and the meat and potatoes of this video isn't so much about how corporations can control the law, because after all, money buys votes. They've got a lot of money that buys lobbyists. It buys votes not just from us, but from the people in Congress who make the laws. Instead, this video focuses on how they shape our opinion, how the corporations and other entities have been able to shape public opinion to the point where we swallow and believe the narrative, and they pretty much control us. We end up believing things because that's what we were taught, and that's what everybody around us was taught. And so wherever you look, there's kind of an echo chamber. So it seems to make sense. Anyhow, let's get into it. Now, throughout history, generally, there's been a small amount of people that have controlled everybody else. The current iteration of it started a few hundred years ago when all of a sudden common land started to be fenced off and people were forced to go to work for somebody else in order to survive. They could no longer make a living on their own in what amounted to public land. This started in Britain, I think, in the 1700s. And all of a sudden, people flocked to the cities, not because they wanted to go to the cities, but because, well, it was either that or starve. And it went further than that because there were laws against being poor, which sounds kind of familiar. The people didn't choose wage labor. They were forced into it. It's either go to work in the factories or starve. As one historian put it, this was the birth of wage slavery. The idea they didn't have to put you in a cage, physically. All they had to do was kind of push you in that direction where it was your only option. Your ability to live independently is taken away from you, and all of a sudden the company looks like a savior because they're offering you a paycheck. That's how the current system began, but the real horror is in how it was sold to us. When the Industrial Revolution happened, all of a sudden these factory owners needed a lot of people to work, and so they worked these long hours and they paid them almost nothing. There's plenty of evidence to show that they had the politicians in their pockets. However, they had a bigger problem, and that is convincing the people that this was actually a good thing. The last thing they wanted was some version of the French Revolution. In the book, The Invention of Capitalism, it is documented that early economists talked about the idea that peasants had to be coerced into working for somebody else. There's plenty of documentation to show that these early tycoons absolutely wanted a docile workforce that did not think for themselves. They considered people to be natural resources that they could mold and use at will. They wanted people to show up and do what they were told and not complain. And not only that, but they wanted them to consume as much as possible. Not just show up and do the work, but to buy stuff. And maybe they couldn't get that first generation of workers to buy into this, but they could definitely get the second generation to do it because they were going to control education. They brought over systems from Prussia, and which I've talked about quite a bit, which were really focused on creating obedient workers. You got to show up on time, leave on time, sit still, do what you're told. Don't really think, just spit back or regurgitate what I've told you, and that's going to be real learning. Now, if it stopped there, that would be bad enough, and we still do it to this day. There's tons of documentation showing how much corporations have funded education and given them specific textbook. This is what you're going to teach them. But it gets worse than that because corporations have bought up so much media, even way back in the day. I didn't realize how far back this went, where they bought out articles and wrote like opinion pieces and distributed pamphlets and the media of the day, letting people know that the government was bad, that the best thing to do was to let the corporations do what they wanted to do, that was going to take care of you, that the worst thing to ever happen to you would be, let's say, something like government regulation, because they didn't want that, because that would interfere with the profits. There's actually a really famous case involving, I think, the Dodge brothers and the Ford company, where the courts decided that the primary responsibility of a corporation is to its shareholders. It's not to the workers, it's not to worker right, it's not to the community, but it's to make the most money possible for the people that invested in it. And if you're going to do that, you better be able to convince the public, the majority of the people, your workers, that in fact that is true. And by the 80s, we get things like trickle-down economics, where we're told that a rising tide raises all ships, and the best thing we can do is to let the wealthy earn as much money as possible, because that's going to put money in our pockets. But it didn't happen that way, did it? If that was it, that would be bad enough. But there's more. Corporations and organizations funded by these corporations bought off economists. They found the economists that were going to spread the idea that they wanted. They got people like Milton Friedman and other economists to say what they wanted them to say. They took these people that were otherwise fringe and weren't necessarily working with data on many cases, and they promoted them. They got schools to take them in. They were able to promote their ideas and turn this into regular curriculum. Heck, Friedman said that the social responsibility of business is to increase its profits. That's the social responsibility. So you've got these organizations like the National Association of Manufacturers, who at first opposed child labor laws. Once those passed, well, they said, well, we've actually supported those all along. And they poured in tons and tons of money, not only into public propaganda, but also into affecting how decisions get made on the congressional level. Which is worse? It's hard to say, but I really think it's the idea they were able to reshape how we thought about ourselves and how we thought about them. They let us know that any regulation was the beginning of a slippery slope towards communism. Heck, the National Electric Light Association actually rewrote public textbooks to let children know that private utilities equal freedom, but public utilities equal socialism. George Stigler's abridged The Wealth of Nations, stripped it of all of Smith's pro-worker, pro-regulation rhetoric. And that book didn't just stay on dusty university shelves, it became what students read and believed. Students that would grow up to be lawyers and, well, congresspeople. And if that was all of it, that would be bad enough. But then you've got religion. The early Protestants like Calvin started to talk about this idea that work was holiness and not working was sin, that somehow your worth was based upon how much you worked. And we hear this echoed decades, centuries later, where hustle culture and the idea that you should be working, or otherwise there's something wrong with you. But who are you going to be working for? Well, you're going to be working for them, aren't you? Not for yourself, not in most cases. We self-police. We talk to each other and say, hey man, get back to work. It's joking, but then again, is it really joking? Or is it because we've all been conditioned to believe this from every single side? We grow up believing that endless work is noble, that being poor means you're lazy, that obedience means you're patriotic. And that quote, ask not what your country can do for you, ask instead what you can do for your country, which sounds really profound until you think about it, all of a sudden translates to your employer. We start to believe that sacrifice for our company is just as sacred as sacrifice for our country or for our God. And we got taught that all of these are important, but all of a sudden we're applying this moral logic to our work. And we expand that moral worldview to include the idea that our companies, that our rich people are creating jobs, creating this economy that we should be thankful for. Our productivity has skyrocketed since the 70s, but our wages haven't. In fact, a lot of the wages have gone to the CEOs, or the money has gone to the CEOs. And we're taught and start to believe the idea, well, that's necessary because this money needs to go back into the company. And if people were paid a larger wage, well, then the company would go bankrupt and then there wouldn't be any work. And God forbid the government come in and regulate anything, because that would bring production to a halt. And then we wouldn't have a job and the government would ruin everything. People like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, well, they're our saviors. They're the people that drive the entire economy. And without them, we would have nothing. And even if we're unhappy with that, well, we're taught to believe, well, that's just the way it is. And you can't really fight the system. And while you're at it, buy more stuff. Stuff that's going to break because there's planned obsolescence built right in, because after all, they need you to keep buying. That's why they're so worried about the population decreasing, because, man, there's going to be fewer workers and fewer consumers. So you better go have babies, because that's your duty to your country and to them. But what do we do about it? I don't want this video just to be a downer and an expose at how corrupt things are, because after all, at the end of the day, we have to figure out, well, how am I going to live life based upon this information? I don't believe that we're going to cause change overnight. I believe that's probably going to take generations to have a real positive change upon how everything works. For me, the real takeaway has been awareness. Realize how all this is operating, how much we've been indoctrinated, and then do something to make a change in your own life. You're not going to change the system, but you can do your best to get out of it and not be a prisoner of the system. And trust me, I know this is tough. And the biggest struggle isn't actually doing something to get yourself out of the system. It's the psychological struggle, because we've been taught so much to believe that this is how things are, this is how they're supposed to be, that working hard for a company is a sign of virtue. Sacrifice for the greater good is a virtue. And we've been taught, and a lot of us believe, that government is the worst thing that can happen. It should just keep hands off and let business and the markets run themselves, because of course these things will sort themselves out. There's no possibility that there's a small group of people profiting from this and pulling the strings, making sure that things happen in their favor, right? That's impossible. For me, the biggest battle is between the ears. And once we wage that battle, then it's up to us to do something about it. What you do to escape the system, I don't know. I'm doing this. I've got my eyes on some other things as well to, have an income that I'm not dependent upon these other people. But, I can't tell you what to do. The fact is, if you become aware and start to do something, that's important. Because we're not going to change the system, but we don't have to be slaves of it. And we don't need to keep on swallowing the BS that they've been feeding us since infancy. I'd love to hear your feedback on this. If you think I'm crazy, if this resonates with you, whatever your feedback is, I would really love to hear it. And thanks a lot for watching. Like I said, maybe I'll make a video with a lot more of the quotes, but I can also point to some other sources which are really great things to watch or to read. Maybe I'll link some of those below.